And that actually culminated into a faculty research position at Qatar that she holds now and works with a dynamic team of transportation researchers. Her specialization is in planning and policy and evaluation of alternative fuels and advanced propulsion technologies. She's also the co-coordinator for the Tampa Bay Clean Cities, which serves a 6-county region in West Central Florida. She served as co-principal investigator for several research projects funded by DOE, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and also several state and local departments like FDOT, Department of Ag, etc. And she has a long list of pretty cool projects, and some of them are synthesis of clean vehicle policies and programs for airport private ground transportation operators, market penetration analysis of alternative fuel and autonomous vehicles for the Safe Transportation Department, an assessment of federal program utilization and development of strategies to optimize mobility services for disadvantaged transportation groups, and an analysis for a university transit 10-year operational strategic development plan. So with that, let's welcome Ms. Austin.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bandy. I appreciate you all having me here today. I was so much looking forward to this. If you guys will give me just a second, I'll go ahead and share my screen and get my slide up. Also, just a heads up, I'll be turning my camera off just for the presentation. My Teams tends to get a little glitchy when I'm trying to run slides and camera at the same time. So again, first, I just want to thank PCGS for inviting me here to speak with you all today. And again, thank you for that kind introduction. As Dr. Bandy mentioned, I am a PCGS alum. I graduated with my master's in global sustainability, and my concentration was actually in water. So, I didn't know I would love transportation leaving PCGS, but it definitely has not only become my career, but also really a passion. And so I'm, really excited to share with you all today about some of the clean transportation work that we're doing, not only here in Tampa, but also statewide. So, before I delve in, for those who are not familiar with Qatar, we're housed here on campus in the College of Engineering. So Qatar is kind of a unique institution here on campus. So Qatar leads in transportation research, education, technology transfer related to transportation. And the work that we do here at Qatar supports various agencies and organizations spanning from, a local level to state, national, and even international. So right now we have about 35 full-time faculty researchers, over 50 students, and a team of admin and staff, who work really hard to support this work. And so Qatar is also home to the National Institute for Congestion Relief, NICER. So this was actually funded through a DOT grant, and we're considered a National Designated University Transportation Center, UTC. So these UTCs are really aimed to advance research and also advance education that really address some of these more critical transportation problems. So again, just to give you a little bit of background context about Qatar. All right, so to go ahead and dive into my topic today, as many of you on the call already know, transportation is a major contributor to not only GHG emissions, but to also air pollution. So, the EPA found that transportation accounts for the largest portion, about 28% of total GHG emissions. Now, this was back in 2018, which was the most recently available data. So out of that sector, we have cars, trucks, aircraft, and railroads. All those transportation sources are contributing to emissions. So those light duty vehicles, which, are those like passenger cars, passenger SUVs, and light trucks, kind of make up that largest category of emitters, while our medium and heavy duty trucks make up the second largest, followed by, to a lesser extent, rail, ships, and boats. So again, this just really demonstrates that there is this need to address the impacts from transportation emissions, which can be done through a number of ways, some of which I'll talk about in the next few slides. So really, in part as a response to this need to reduce transportation's carbon footprint, there's really been a push to kind of overhaul the transportation system and really find opportunities to make the system more sustainable. So I know that you guys have an entire concentration on this topic. I know Dr. Bandy leads it, and some of my Cutter colleagues teach the very course on it as well. So I won't go too heavy in specifics, but I figured there's a few strategies that I could talk about here today. So, with sustainable transportation, really like, other topics within sustainability, we do have, a portfolio of options to choose from. So things like multimodal, looking at how all the various transportation options work in an integrated way and really try to maximize all those modes. And so by modes, I mean, roadways, rail, marine, ferry, air transportation, and even walking and cycling. Really, all these modes need to be considered in what would be the most efficient way to combine those to get people and things on where they need to go. So demand management. So when we talk about demand management, that's really looking at different strategies and policies that reduce the total travel demand. So, typically the response is to just stick on more lanes, build more freeways when travel demand increases. But demand management instead tries to look at different ways to reduce traffic through things like promoting rideshare or carpooling, providing more like pedestrian-friendly travel, biking, encouraging flex time work schedules or remote working, and other methods. So pricing policies. Congestion pricing looks to putting in like higher peak charges for using certain travel modes, like using an expressway. So during higher congestion, with the goal of reducing congestion as it would encourage drivers to find maybe alternative ways to avoid getting those higher fees. So we have vehicle technology improvements, of course, we've seen fuel efficiency standards and technology improvements that have helped, vehicles to use gas more efficiently. We also have clean fuels, alternative fuels, and electric vehicles are certainly an important part of this. And that's really what I'm going to be focusing most on today. And so finally, we also have like land use and transportation planning. So when we're looking at the design of a transportation network, which includes roads, sidewalks, bike lanes, those definitely can impact the transportation system as a whole and also impact accessibility. In addition to that, land uses can really influence the amount of traffic on a roadway, really depending on what those land uses are, right? Whether it's a highly commercialized area or a rural road, these all factor into that traffic load in that area. So really these I've just kind of touched very broadly on all these different pieces about how we can make our transportation more sustainable. And, there's research going on at Cutter and our partner institutions and certainly other departments here on campus that are all looking into these. So, while all of those considerations are certainly important, my focus is really on fuels and how alternative fuels can be used to reduce emissions and also improve air quality. So when we talk about alternative fuels, that includes a variety of them. So we have natural gas, which can either be compressed, liquefied, or renewable natural gas. We have propane, renewable diesel, ethanol, hydrogen, biodiesel, and other biofuels, hybrid electric, and also fully electric vehicles are all considered kind of under this umbrella of alternative fuels. So, certainly each of these fuels have their own merits and they also have their own drawbacks. And we've also seen in our work that each of these have kind of their own unique applications. But, we think that fuel really is kind of a critical part of this solution. And it's what I spend a lot of my time thinking about, and talking about, and working for. So I thought it'd be helpful if I just gave kind of a quick overview of some of our major national and state initiatives on alternative fuels before diving into what we're doing here on a local level. So the U.S. Department of Energy Vehicle Technologies Office, they focus on kind of several aspects related to fuel and propulsion. So they focus on electrification, advanced combustion. They look at materials technology like battery technology development, things like energy efficient mobility systems, and they also have a group called technology integration. And this is actually where the US DOE Clean Cities program is housed under. So tech integration, really is kind of a fancy word for just focusing on that connection between research and policies that are going on a national level and kind of connecting that with what's going on at a more local level. So as I mentioned, the Clean Cities program falls under this kind of tech integration arm. The Clean Cities program has been around for over 25 years now, really with the primary goal to advance the energy, economic, and environmental security, primarily through supporting these local actions to reduce petroleum. So, really the goals of this program center around reducing that petroleum consumption, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and also reducing dependence on imported oil. But I will say that's becoming less and less of an issue as our domestic production has really amped up. So I'll jump back to Clean Cities a little bit more once I start talking about what we're doing at Tampa Bay Clean Cities. But first, I thought I'd talk about a few other national initiatives that we have going on. So, other federal agencies other than DOE are also involved in various degrees to alternative fuels work. So we have FHWA, they administer the Alternative Fuel Corridor Program. This was set up a few years back, and the goal was really to set up this kind of national network of both alternative fuel and also EV charging stations along our national highway system. So FHWA set up this formal designation process. So state DOTs can basically submit their highway segments for nomination as either corridor pending or corridor ready, depending on how many alternative fuel and how many charging stations are actually located off of that interstate segment. There's also opportunity to get signage put in place on those highways that show segments that are designated as alt fuel corridors. Just to note that Florida, we did get our nomination approved last year during the last cycle, but at this point we don't have signage up on our highways, but I'm hopeful and optimistic that will change. So, in Florida, I will say all of our major highways, I-4, 75, 10, 95, all of those have been designated as corridor ready, as well as some of our smaller highway segments as well. And again, that corridor ready just means that there's adequate charging stations or adequate alternative fueling stations, depending on, the designation that your segment got along that corridor. So, another thing I wanted to bring up is, the proposed House bill, since that has been gaining, quite a bit of attention lately. Certainly this administration has indicated an interest in investing in electric vehicles, and I think that this bill, really reflects some of that momentum. So the Clean Future Act, climate leadership and environmental action, this is really about new climate legislation with the goal of achieving zero GHG pollution by 2015, which I believe is in line with the IPCC range. So this bill includes kind of a wide range of measures to reduce emissions across a variety of sectors. So, we of course have the power sector looking at clean energy, distributed energy, grid infrastructure, microgrids, as well as, sectors such as in building and industry and waste reduction and others. So, the Clean Act also targets transportation emissions, which again is one of our largest contributors. So the bill, as it stands now, includes investments in transportation electrification, meaning providing grants and rebates for EVs and EV charging stations. They also include for zero emission school buses and also formally authorizing our Clean Cities program, which is certainly important to what I do. And I just want to point out too that, these are not the only areas where the federal government is involved. We have a lot of grants that are administered by DOT, FTA, and the U.S. Department of Energy that go to support alternative fuels. For those that are familiar with PSTA's electric buses, those were able to be procured in part due to an FTA Lono grant. HART is also using FTA grant funding, I think from a separate funding pocket, to support the purchase of their 10 electric buses. And, there are certainly others, but I thought I would just highlight a few of these bigger initiatives. So I'm going to go ahead and switch gears and talk a little bit about what we're doing at a state level here in Florida. I'll preface that, Florida has lagged behind other states in terms of incentivizing alternative fuels and electric transportation. But, I'd say in the past couple years, there's definitely been more interest at a state level in these issues. So first we have Senate Bill 7018 that was recently passed and also signed by Governor DeSantis. So this bill authorized the Florida DOT, also working with like the Florida Office of Energy, the Florida Public Service Commission. They tasked them with developing a master plan for EV infrastructure along our state highway system. So I know that work is already underway on this plan, and we're certainly interested to see what this plan ends up looking like. Another state level initiative we have is the Florida Diesel Emissions Mitigation Program. So this is funded through the VW settlement. I'm sure some of you guys might remember that scandal a few years ago where VW was cheating on their emissions during testing. So they were sued, and this funding basically came from the settlement, which is being allocated out to each of the states and is used to support diesel reduction activities in each of the states. So Florida got quite a big chunk of that, about 170 million. So at this point, the state has already funded several rounds of EV charging, and they also just finished up an RFP for funding for school, transit, and shuttle buses, and that's to convert or replace with alternative fuels. But their emphasis is more on electric technologies. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the Florida Office of Energy. We as a coalition work with them often, and they're definitely doing some interesting work in this field. So while the natural gas vehicle rebate program has sunsetted, this was a really critical incentive that the Office of Energy had ran for several years, which helped fleets to purchase natural gas or propane vehicles. I know personally a lot of fleets who took advantage of this rebate, and it certainly helped to push natural gas and propane vehicle adoption in our state. The Office of Energy also recently wrapped up their Florida EV Roadmap project, which in a way can sort of be seen as a precursor to that 7018 bill that I've just mentioned. But this report basically just provides an overview of Florida's charging system and identifies different opportunities for where charging is needed and where charging is lacking. And lastly, the Office of Energy is also managing a new project related to alternative fuels and resiliency. I'm involved in that project, so I'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right, so I'm going to start to kind of bring it back to what we're doing here at Tampa Bay Clean Cities. So as I mentioned, the U.S. Clean Cities program is really set up to help support local actions, local coalitions to reduce petroleum. The Clean Cities program has a national network of coalitions and coordinators, and that really provides great support to do peer-to-peer learning, helps us with problem solving, providing technical assistance, and they also provide us tons of great tools and resources and publications to help us do our work here. So Clean Cities really focuses on sort of 4 major activities. Again, supporting that local and national partnerships, a lot of information and education work. Some of the national labs have basically developed tools that we can use to help our fleet partners figure out different cost-effective ways to integrate alternative fuel vehicles. Clean Cities provides, again, problem-solving assistance, and they also offer yearly competitive funding that we can apply for to do different research and do different projects. So again, just a great program that offers that national support to really work on local projects. So, as I mentioned, there's Clean Cities coalitions, all across the U.S. So Tampa Bay Clean Cities, I'll call it TBCCC moving forward, was formed in 2012. This was done through a partnership with the Environmental Protection Commission, Tampa Electric, Qatar, and PCGS. So the coalition was officially designated by DOE in 2014. And, since then, our coalition has really grown to include a diverse membership base. And again, we cover about 6 counties in our West Central Florida area. So our mission and vision here locally really mirror the priorities of the national program. We seek to be that area's resource for tech assistance. We provide networking opportunities. We help to connect grant funding, really with the goal to improve the quality of life in Tampa Bay, from air quality to improving mobility and also improving that local economic base. So, while every Clean Cities Coalition is structured a little bit differently, we do have a membership-based organization. And so our members come from government, local government, education institutions, transit agencies, utilities, manufacturers, industry. And many of our members are actively working with alternative fuels. And our role really is just to help facilitate this by, again, providing that support, providing opportunity for education and outreach, providing training, and again, trying to connect that national and state funding to our local projects. So this slide, I'm not going to read it, but just gives you kind of an idea of the different member organizations that we work with. So just to say, we have a fairly healthy alt fuel market here in Tampa. CNG is definitely our biggest sector. We have refuse haulers, heavy duty trucks. Both City of Tampa and Hillsborough, they either operate or they contract with CNG garbage truck haulers. A lot of our county schools have adopted propane school buses. That's definitely one of the niche markets for propane. We've also, of course, have biodiesel with our USF Bull Runner transit buses. They run on B20. And we've also seen over the past few years, definitely more electric vehicle interest and adoption. We have some electric transit buses and then some, light duty vehicles as well. So really, one of our roles as a coalition is to track this alternative fuel usage and report that to DOE. And so last year, the Tampa Bay region displaced 10.3 million gallons of gasoline and reduced almost 18,000 tons of GHG emissions. So just to note that, this data is self-reported from our stakeholders and members. We collect this data through an annual survey. So, take into consideration that this data doesn't even fully capture like the total reductions, and we assume that these reductions are even greater. So as a Clean Cities Coalition, really our major activities center around engaging the public and coordinating these education and outreach events. Really our goal is to connect those members and stakeholders who are, demonstrating success with alternative fuels. We want to show off their hard work, and to possibly help with other fleets that may be interested in alternative fuels. And connecting them with those organizations, I think, is really valuable. So I won't list all of our activities, but this slide just gives you kind of a snapshot of some of the events that we've hosted or participated in around our area. So I thought it might be helpful just to touch on some of the other projects I'm involved in, both through my work at Qatar and with TBCCC. So one of our focuses has been on workplace EV charging. This has definitely been a topic of interest for several years. As the data shows that most people do charge their EVs at home. However, workplace charging is considered one of the second most important location to charge vehicles at. So through the coalition, we've hosted several workshops and webinars on workplace charging. Certainly, we have organizations here in Tampa that are already doing that. Raytheon, MetLife, TECO, some banks and credit unions. Here at USF, of course, we have charging, and we've also seen EV charging popping up more at like workplace plazas. So I'd say there are definitely unique considerations to building a workplace charging program, and I hope that this is one of the projects that we might see some momentum over the next few years as we see EV adoption increase. So another project we did, this was with TECO. We partnered with them to develop material for an EV driver's ed course. This was to be used at several high schools in Tampa. So as part of this project, TECO funded the purchase of several EVs and their charging infrastructure, really with the goal to provide EV and energy efficiency instruction for high school students. So this project had a couple bumps in the road with implementation, like a lot of projects do, but it was a great way to sort of weave in that energy education at the high school level, which, to be honest, is an audience that we typically don't get to reach or work with very often. Okay, so we, as I mentioned before, we also provide training periodically. So we partnered with our other Florida coalitions to host first responder training for alternative fuels. This was a great opportunity. I think people tend to not think about the complications of having these new vehicles, new technologies on the road, these new propulsion systems. We tend to focus on the benefits, but certainly, there's a concern when you have high voltage vehicles running around and vehicles running on compressed gases running around on our streets. And it certainly is critical that our first responders know how to safely, respond to these accidents. So, we were able to provide training twice in our region through partnering with a training consortium. We had a great turnout from our fire departments, and I think this project really had statewide impact. All right, so the last topic that I wanted to touch on before we jump into some Q&A involves a couple of efforts both on the state and local level at looking at how alternative fuels also fits into emergency planning and resiliency planning. Certainly I don't have to tell you guys, but there's a need to address vulnerability to flooding events and hurricanes in our state. So, we wanted to know how alternative fuels can help to diversify fuel supply and really enhance resiliency. So, TBCCC is part of sort of two initiatives. We were part of a local project, which I'll talk a little bit more about, sponsored by NREL on sort of documenting what's going on at a case study level here in Tampa. And the Florida Office of Energy is also sponsoring a project looking at developing kind of a statewide approach to fuel resiliency, which we are also a part of. So I figured just to take a little bit of a step back, as we all know, hurricanes are increasing in intensity and in frequency, which is certainly expected to be exacerbated by climate change. So it's interesting because, the field of transportation resilience has really been focused more on infrastructure, roads and bridges. If you go to some of these conferences, that's really, those are some of the bigger presentations. But, there's definitely been some work going on in looking at how also fuel plays a role into all of this. So DOE has published a report. There's also been an IREV initiative, which basically looked at individual case studies looking at how alternative fuel vehicles were used to support, evacuation and other emergency events. So NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, as part of this Tampa Bay project, developed what they call their 5-pronged approach to fuel resiliency, which basically just highlights, what are maybe the more critical steps in this process. So certainly redundancy is important, having multiple fuels, multiple sources, multiple routes, and being able to use vehicles in various ways is an important component. Having adequate fuel storage nearby is certainly a critical part of this. Ensuring that there's access to that fuel, before, during, and after hurricanes, and ensuring that, fuel storage is located in strategic areas, and also establishing those communication protocols. Resupply, certainly figuring out how we can resupply those fuel storages as soon as we can following disasters, and also looking at how stuff like renewable energy to resupply EVs, how does that fit in? And also, of course, looking at efficiency. How do we maximize, each of those vehicles and also maximize those miles per gallon? So when we look at the supply chain of different fuels, we certainly see opportunities and also vulnerabilities. For example, natural gas is transported through pipeline as opposed to rail or ship, which may be less vulnerable to outages or shortages. We can look at the supply chain of electric lines, whether it's above ground lines or underground lines. Certainly those have their benefits and drawbacks. So really figuring out these supply chains is all an important part of, piece of this puzzle to really figure out where those vulnerabilities are in our fuel supply network. So, we found through our case study that Tampa, we are in a unique position when it comes to fuel resiliency. We're more vulnerable to petroleum shortages. Our petroleum enters by ship rather than pipeline. And in fact, Port Tampa Bay takes in quite a large petroleum shipment that's used all over the state. And, inherently the port is just more vulnerable to hurricane impacts. So because of this, we thought it would be important to sort of delve into how fuel management and fuel resiliency might apply here. So for the Tampa Bay case study, this project was completed in August of last year. And really our goals were just to collect data on fuel management and disaster planning response here in Tampa Bay, to really look at those best practices and case studies to see how maybe alternative fuels can help improve resilience, to look at those critical facilities, and to just really identify those areas of improvement. So as part of this project, we conducted a workshop and also phone interviews with public fleets. And, through our discussions, we developed these findings. It's really critical to understand where these fuel supply vulnerabilities are, as I mentioned earlier. We found from talking to these public fleets that timing is important when preparing fuel and fleet vehicles for an impending hurricane. Things like asset staging, moving those fleet vehicles to like higher elevation, is a key strategy used by, all the public fleets we spoke with. High water capable vehicles obviously are important for navigating through standing water, noting that many vehicles, including a lot of alternative fuel vehicles, are just not capable of doing. Debris removal, of course, is an important part of disaster recovery. We found that a lot of fleets use, a variety of fuel strategies, ensuring there's good storage, that there's backup supply, diversifying those fuel sources through alternative fuels, and also sharing fuel resources among local agencies. And, we also found out that one of our biggest challenges that our public, fleets are facing is being able to accurately calculate those fuel burn rates when you're under emergency conditions, since, certainly your routes and the amount of fuel you need is going to look a lot different. So I'm not going to read through this slide, but these are essentially the set of recommendations, that we developed based off of our findings, again, highlighting some of those key strategies to improve local resiliency. And really our goal was to find opportunity for AFVs to kind of bolster this resiliency through fuel diversification. So as far as next steps go, we're part of the statewide alternative fuel resiliency plan, which again is a joint effort between Qatar, TBCCC, NREL, UCF, and the Office of Energy. So our goal is to develop a guidance document that looks at recommendations and findings from both research and site visits and interviews, to develop a statewide emergency planning document for how to integrate alternative fuels into planning for, emergency management and resiliency. So just to say, if any of you are affiliated with a local agency or organization and, you want to stay in the loop with developments on this project, please feel free to contact me and I'll get you in our database. So, I definitely could keep talking because there is a lot of interesting stuff going on in both the alternative fuel and electric transportation world. And I'm sure there's stuff I missed, but I'll stop here, and I hope there's enough time for a few questions. And just a couple last points, for those who are interested in getting involved with us here at Tampa Bay Clean Cities, please feel free to shoot me an email. We also have a Facebook and Twitter group, as well as a mailing list. When we're not in a pandemic, we do a lot of in-person events, and we'd love to have you guys attend or volunteer. We also periodically host an intern, and in fact, we have a PCGS student, Brianna DeRosa, who's interning with us now, and I always make sure to let PCGS know when these opportunities come up. So yeah, again, just thanking PCGS for inviting me to speak to y'all today, and just want to emphasize to you students out there that the sustainability field really has just blossomed over the past few years. And just to note, there's a lot of unique opportunities and niches for this sector. And, like I mentioned, I studied water when I was at PCGS, and I loved it and assumed I would go into that field after graduation. But, this opportunity through Clean Cities came up, and I realized that a lot of the skills that I learned really, transferred well to transportation. So just keep an open mind. All right, so with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing, turn my camera back on, and welcome any questions.
Austin, we did have a question in the chat box. Are there ways for undergrad students to get involved in these activities, like specifically Clean City initiatives?
Yes, I will say that our internships both accept undergraduate and graduate students, and we've hosted both. So certainly welcome any student, when the opportunity comes up to apply if you are interested. We do periodically do events here at USF. I don't know if any of you attended USF Transportation Day last year, or yeah, right before the pandemic hit, actually. And we usually do a booth there, and we brought some electric vehicles, and so certainly would welcome anyone who's interested in that to reach out to me, and if those opportunities come up, would love to have you get involved.
I already sent a personal email to you relating to my personal question, but I also put something that could be used for the public. Like, where can we find this research, like alternative the fuel and energy, if that's okay to ask?
Sure. So, are you talking about like reports and documents that we produce, or just good publications in general?
Both is fine.
Okay, so the Alternative Fuel Data Center, AFDC, is basically managed by the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, EERE. They are a fantastic resource. If you go to that website, again, it's the Alternative Fuel Data Center. They have links to publications, links to reports, links to tools and calculators, all kinds of stuff. They're a great resource. We also publish some of those tools on our TBCCC website that we have now. As far as our our reports go, Qatar will normally post publications kind of in their clearinghouse on their website. So certainly, I think if you were to search keyword, you could find our reports there. Sometimes, since we do reports for clients, those will be kind of sent to them, and it's up to them whether or not they want to make that public. But hopefully that answers your question.
Hey, Austin.
George.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm fine. Just to add also that NREL has a number of reports that are accessible on their website. So if the person who asked is looking for especially more technical or even policy reports on fuels, they can also look at the nrel.gov website. Okay.
Yes.
Good presentation.
Thank you.
So Austin, I have a question about the overall focus of this program, the Clean Cities Coalition. Is it only centered around GHGs related to transportation emission, or it expands into industrial release of GHGs as well?
I will say that the primary focus of Clean Cities is surface transportation. So that is primarily, what we look at. However, I will say, and let me know if I'm not answering your question correctly, when we do things like fleet assessments, and our fleet says we want to know about life cycle emissions, not just what's coming out of our tailpipe, we certainly incorporate that as well into our evaluation. So we're not looking at just what's burning in the tailpipe, but also what's burning at the source, whether it be, burning fuels to power the electric grid, or, burning fuels directly.
So when you say TICO is a member organization within the umbrella, are you looking at TICO overall GHG, or you're looking at TICO fleet for improvement?
Primarily TICO fleet. Yeah, most of our work is primarily focused, on the surface transportation and the fleet side. Okay.
All right, and I have one more question. There's a lot of myth about alternative fuel, electric vehicles, and anxiety, and charging stations. Do you also have an education campaign to educate people on a regular basis, or it is more hardcore research and implementation of
No. So certainly we have, through our various projects, like for that EV education, we had a whole section on trying to bust some of these myths. And you know what? Some of them aren't myths. I mean, certainly there are challenges to some of these fuels. When we talk with fleets, we try to be very objective and just to say, these might be some of the benefits of using a natural gas vehicle versus a propane, and then there certainly are your drawbacks as well. So definitely, I mean, part of our mission is not just, not even just fleet centric, but also just, educating the public on, some of the benefits and also just the challenges too of navigating these fuels.
Yeah, and the pandemic has, okay, so it's a general question. Did the pandemic influence your mission and your activities in any significant way?
Very interesting question. So, I was looking at some of the fuel data in Hillsborough County, and I looked it was just a month's worth of data. It was April of last year. Fuel consumption was down by almost a third, which was just crazy. So of course, I'm thrilled that, you're getting emissions reduction benefits by simply just not driving your vehicle as much. That's definitely a strategy to reduce overall emissions. It's not just about the propulsion type or the fuel type. Now, I will say, though, that, certainly like when we do our annual reporting and our data collection for the annual report, we've already started seeing our different fleets who are using things like electric vehicles and other alternative fuels, their usage is down. So, it's certainly not just gas and diesel vehicles that are reducing their operations, but yeah, the pandemic has affected, all fleet operations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Apologies, I was a few minutes late to the presentation, so I don't know if you addressed this, but I'm just curious to know what city around the country is just really doing a great job in achieving sustainable transportation goals that we're looking to achieve. Is there a city that is really setting the standard?
That's a good question. And I mean, I'll just be upfront. California clearly does a lot of work, but they also have state level policy and mandates and regulations that kind of force some of these cities to, to switch to alternative fuels. So we turn to California a lot. They have a lot of technical experience, certainly because they've been using these fuels longer and on a larger scale than maybe some of the cities in the South or, in the Midwest. We have a few cities here in Florida. Coral Gables has a pretty decent sized fleet EV program. So, definitely Orlando's doing a ton of work. Their fleet manager is, I mean, man, he's got energy for days. He's explored every kind of alternative fuel there is. And, they're definitely very, very progressive on that front. So, yes, there are certainly some cities that are doing more than others. Our goal is to try to find those cities and say, hey, can you come talk to our cities and kind of share what you're doing and share your knowledge.
Great. Thank you. I enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
I don't know you're allowed to answer this question, and you can look at the email I sent you to find more information. But is it because I originally was thinking that maybe all three of our campuses can have sustainable transport since we're one campus, but I don't know if that's realistically possible.
Do you mean to connect the three campuses?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's a great question.
That's why I sent that email, just in case we don't have enough time to go in depth for it.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say that's a little bit out of my purview, but certainly something to consider. I know that we have students and faculty who will sometimes, travel to our other campuses. Certainly something to think about. I do know that so there's something called a BRT, bus rapid transit system, that's kind of underway. Their goal is really to connect the north end of our area, Wesley Chapel, to all the way to St. Pete. And so certainly there might be opportunity there to, I don't know, connect a Bull Runner route to a Hart route, which connect to the BRT. So I think that there are possibly certain, certain ways to make that work. Again, a little bit outside of the scope of what we do at Clean Cities, though.
Amazon has a goal to convert all their delivery vehicles to electric vehicles, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, they do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are you guys working together or?
So Clean Cities, the national program, has what they call the National Clean Fleet Partnership, and so those big companies, UPS, FedEx, Coca-Cola, all those big national fleets, they tend to work with them directly. So and which makes sense, of course, because there's 50 of us coalition. So so we don't work directly with someone like Amazon, but it's not to say I wouldn't love to talk with them. Yeah, and certainly, like I said, if a question pops up, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm also on LinkedIn. Definitely welcome to hear from you guys. And if you are interested, once we're back in the swing of things and doing in-person events again, if any of y'all would like to help out, we would love that.
Thank you, Austin from PCGS. Thank you so much for your presentation this afternoon. We also look forward to your participation in our global conference on April 8th.
Yes, that sounds great.
And thank you, Dr. Bandy, for hosting the meeting, and to our students for participating. A copy of the presentation will be available on our website tomorrow as well.
Good job, Sid. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.